You know we run this every day, all day, and we ain't tired yet.
Hey everybody, my guest today is Sister Regina of the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Jenny?
I'm doing good, you know, and we both laugh as we say that because I don't think I've ever called you Sister Regina, a nun in my entire life, but it feels good to call you that, you know, because I remember, how many years ago was it when you came?
About 2.5.
2.5 years ago. I remember specifically you came to the running group and you introduced yourself as Bernie Cochran's daughter, Britt. And, you know, I keep thinking, Bernie's daughter, in my mind, time never passes. So I expected you to be 12 years old, not a full-grown woman.
Right.
And here you are, and you came and you jumped into the running group. And, you know, there was a special bond because you were Bernie's daughter to begin with, because Bernie and I, you know, I've actually got a picture of him here that I don't know if the people at home can see, but we can put it. But Bernie and I actually trained together, and he and I ran the Valentine's Couples Day run, which is, you know, appropriate for it. It's coming up this weekend.
Right.
And even if you look, Britt, he's got Dream Team Racing, which is the predecessor of all the Varsity people. So,
I love that.
Anyway, you know, you have sort of followed in his footsteps only in the most positive ways.
Yeah, right.
Like tell us about coming to Baton Rouge and just jumping in and, you know, and being a part of things.
Well, I had taken a leave of absence from my religious community. And came back to Baton Rouge because my family's here. And there's just a lot of past, you know, history turmoil with the family, and there was present turmoil with the family. And so I really took that leave of absence to be able to dig deeper into that. And my mom was here and not doing that well. And so my plan was intentionally to see what I could do to help her. I just didn't know what that was going to look like.
So you were a nun, as we know it, with the habit, and tell us a little bit about your, is it convent?
Yeah, so most people don't know this, but there's a technicality between a nun and a sister. So a nun is typically cloistered, and they're behind monastery walls, and when you see them, they're behind a grill. And sisters are apostolic, so they're out in the world working, and there's a variation of different types of communities. But so our community is very apostolic. We all go by sister something, and we wear a habit all the time and a veil in our work. And so when I took a leave of absence, I've not been wearing the habit, obviously. And so when I go back into the community, I will no longer be wearing these normal clothes, and I'll be wearing the habit again.
Can you identify with Sister Act? You know.
Oh yeah, I mean that's such a fun. It's such a fun movie.
But they were out in the community and great and fun and you know, regular people. And not that nuns aren't, but nuns are, you know, a little higher in. Anyway, I have a great appreciation for.
I think in the past, they've been elevated sort of in a different kind of way. But I think part of the mission of our particular community is bringing a sense of the sacred out into the secular world. And so we interact and work with the laity a lot. And then it's a fine line, right? So we spend a lot of time in prayer and mass every day and meals together, but then we go out and we work really hard, you know, with the people and serve those in the community.
Well, you know, we'll talk a little bit about the life that you live that may have wanted to bring you closer to God in a lot of ways, but help us decide, what was the day when you said, okay, I'm going to become a sister? I won't say nun anymore.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's interchangeable for most people. I think it was over a few set of years. I was in college at LSU, went to work at a summer camp in Western North Carolina, which was a Christian summer camp. And I wasn't Catholic at the time. I met a bunch of people who were Catholic at LSU.
What religion were you then?
I was Baptist and non-denominational. Like when I was at LSU, I was going to Athletes for Christ and some non-denominational churches. So I always had a faith. I always, for some reason, and maybe it's because my family, you know, didn't really claim. They would have claimed to be Christian, and my mom was Baptist, and my stepdad was Episcopalian. But we didn't actively go to church. We weren't actively involved in a church life. So I went to a Baptist high school, and so that helped me.
Right?
Parkview,
Parkview,
yes. Before it was a big 4A school. We were just 2A back then. And then when I went to that summer camp, Camp Catalia, it really increased my faith. I met a bunch of people who they said they were, and they really, they lived the gospel, and that was mind-blowing to me, and it was very attractive because it was just a bunch of fun people. And so
with your background, a grounding in faith has got to be real comforting to you.
It helped. Yeah, it definitely helped a lot. I mean, I clung to it as a form of stability, but also, I mean, when you start to fall in love with God, it's a foundation that, is needed for sure.
And is there a night at summer camp when you say, I'm going to become a sister, or how does that process really work? It's mind-boggling to me to decide I am going to give my life to God. And
I think it was a process because I also had a desire to get married and have kids, which the two go hand in hand. Both are very, I mean, it's more natural, we would say, for most people to get married and have kids. And then in my heart, like slowly, I had some friends who had entered consecrated life or religious life, and it kind of put the thought in my head, but I'd never known any sisters. But I think through private prayer, personal prayer, I began to have this interest and desire to look into religious life, which I was like, where is this coming from? What is this? Yeah. And so I was like, well, God, if this is from you, then you're going to have to show me what to do with this, because I have no idea how to go about this. And it's a little bit like dating, I think, when you're looking at communities. I mean, sometimes if a guy or girl, they're going out, they know if they want to see each other again, typically, and it might take a few times to figure it out, but
God, that's an interesting parallel.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Yeah, but it's so when visiting communities, there's some sort of an attraction, on both sides. And again, it might not happen right away. I wasn't sure. It's not like I was 100% sure the first times I visited. But I just kept saying, okay, God, if this is what you want, then keep opening the door, and I'm just going to keep going forward.
That's a great lesson for us for all areas of our life.
Yeah.
Well, let's back up a little bit, because I know one of the reasons you came back was some healing that needed to be done and taking care of your mom, who, some of her problems may be a byproduct of my friend Bernie.
Yeah.
So we have that in common. And I know Bernie, ever since I knew him, he was crazy and wild and fun and lived life on the edge. But I think I've told you I have a brother, Clint, that was just that exact way. So there was an attraction for me to Bernie. It's like, oh my God, he's just like my brother Clint. I absolutely love him. But there's the other side to that, those people, Clint and Bernie. So growing up with Bernie cannot have been great, because I know things did not end well for him.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think he really made some poor decisions. I'm not sure, what his background was, but at some point he got into drugs and alcohol, and he was just a wounded guy who I think hid that behind strength.
He's a big, burly guy.
He was, and he was a great athlete, and he hid it behind his jovial personality, and it was really attractive and fun-loving and happy-go-lucky sometimes. But on the other hand, you didn't really know when that rage was going to come out. So we tiptoed around him when we were younger, and unfortunately, he had such a rage that he often took out on my mom in an abusive way.
And you watched that?
I did, unfortunately. And that is something that you can't unsee. And it was really kind of growing up in terror, unfortunately. And it takes a while to heal from that.
If you ever do.
I think healing's available, but it takes a lot of hard work. And I'm not going to lie, it is not for the faint of heart to heal. But it really impacted my mom. I think both of them didn't necessarily receive the support they felt they needed from their parents. I mean, my mom's parents were divorced, and she had lost a brother. Their little brother died in a fire, and she was 12 and he was 3. And I think she carried that with her as if it were her responsibility. And my dad, they both just thought they had to figure out life by themselves. and they never really got the help they needed. And it wasn't so popular to go to therapy, in the 70s and 80s, and everybody kind of somehow seems to talk about their therapist today. Sometimes it's a little, TMI, but unfortunately they never really reached out consistently enough to get the help they needed.
And so their life kind of imploded to some extent. I know when I'd heard Bernie, somebody said, what happened to Bernie Cochran, so many years ago, and I had heard that he had changed his identity. I don't know what to, but he changed his identity and was somebody else doing something else. It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think he was undiagnosed with some sort of mental, difficulty, mental illness.
In addition to the drugs and alcohol?
In addition. And I think sometimes drugs and alcohol use can bring out, we might have a propensity or a genetic disposition to some sort of a mental illness, but drugs and alcohol can set that off. And sometimes there's just no going back. And so almost sort of like, I'm not sure what his proper diagnosis would have been, but it seems something of a bipolar component to it, plus whatever the brain changed, with the drugs and alcohol. And so unfortunately, he was a hard worker. He was a disciplined person, but he just didn't confront life the way that he should have confronted life. He was always running from responsibility. And I really don't know how he got in trouble, in terms of with the law and criminal actions. I don't know what they all were. And I guess,
you were pretty young, huh?
I was young, but even in high school, he was in and out of our lives. And that's hard. It's hard for a daughter to always, because you always love your dad.
Was he able to give love? Were you able to feel love from Bernie?
Yes, sometimes, but also sometimes he was so broken and wounded, he was also selfish and mean. Yeah.
I'm saying, I can't even imagine Bernie mean because he was so jovial.
Yeah.
But, I know for sure, having talked to you these 2 years, that there was that side of Bernie I never did know.
Yeah, it's kind of like Bruce Banner. Once he got angry, he couldn't control it.
The Hulk.
Yeah, there was no going back, once he got angry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And eventually, I don't know if you really want to talk about it, but I think it's important to know that he eventually killed himself.
He did.
In circumstances that were similar to what was going on in his life. Do you mind talking a little bit about that, just so you can see how this has come?
Yeah,
full
I
circle?
think hopefully as a way to give people hope, to seek out help when help is needed. And there's even a scripture verse that says, that healthy people don't need a physician, but the sick do, and so we have doctors for a reason. And so unfortunately, he, again, because I think he was afraid of who he was afraid of his anger. He never got proper treatment, and he had an explosive range that most people don't have. And I don't think it was premeditated, but unfortunately, he was always looking for love, always needing a girlfriend, and when that went south, he based his self-worth on that, and he couldn't handle it.
In a fit of jealousy.
And in a fit of jealousy, I think they call it a crime of passion. This, unfortunately, and he had an ex-girlfriend, and I don't really know anything about that story because all I got was the death report. And so unfortunately there was somebody else involved, and I think he got jealous, and he went back to the truck and got a gun, and then her life was taken that day, and then he took his own life.
Yeah,
and it was tragic. I mean, when I found out, I literally collapsed on the floor. It's something that you can't prepare for. There's always an unknown, and you never want somebody to die that broken.
No.
No. There's a range of despair where the frontal lobe is offline, and there's a part of responsibility, a culpability that's taken away from the person. We kind of get in your lizard brain, they call it, and your normal rational brain's just not firing anymore. And if we don't learn how to get help when that happens, then unfortunately for some people, something that horrible can happen.
Yeah, and so your relationship with God has really helped you through a lot of that. But then you decided to come back here and leave the sisterhood. Did you ever think that was permanent, that you were coming back home and may never return? Because I will tell you that you introduced yourself as Brittany, which I eventually called Britt.
Yeah.
And it was probably months, if not a year, before I had any idea that you were a sister. I don't know if that was something that, oh, by the way, and I'm kind of clueless, which sometimes that might be the case, or you kind of wanted to keep that on the down low.
Well, what's interesting is that, this wasn't planned, but the day that I entered my religious community was the day that Bernie committed suicide. That was December 12th, 2006, which is the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so what's wild about that is I think it's hard to, you can only look back, right, in hindsight, and see that like that was sort of God's way of I think, protecting me and giving me a support system when that happened. And so, years later, as I began to, when I chose to take that leave of absence, I think God was with me the entire journey, and I had no idea what that leave of absence coming here, I had no idea what that meant, but there was an element of healing that really just couldn't take place, within the context of a busy life of religious life. And so I always intended to go back, but I just didn't know what that was going to look like and how that was going to happen. And I was actually getting to a part of saying, I don't think I can go back. And then God really intervened at the same time that my mom was diagnosed with cancer.
Well, you really found a home here with, you've got 100 new friends in the running community that really embraced you. And, you really have improved so much as a runner. You've got the good part of Bernie's genes in you. So
absolutely.
So I'm hoping that's going to be kind of hard to leave. But tell us about your decision and your mother's.
Sure. Yeah, the running, it's been great running with the Varsity Sports Group. And running is so much like our faith, right? It's hard for most of us to stick with. The training is every day is not a PR, and it's constantly learning. And then you got injuries, and it's just, when we parallel that to our faith journey, it's like, following God's not for the faint of heart, and God doesn't promise that we're not going to suffer. And so it's a bit like running. Yeah, there's a lot of suffering and sweat and tears and sometimes blood that goes into the training. And so I think it's a great analogy for personal growth as well. And then, in July of last year, I had my own injuries. I haven't really been able to train in the past year like I would prefer to train. I kind of kept my miles low, but last July, I had, kind of was really sensing God was asking me to take a look again about going back to my religious community. And literally within 3 days, Mom was in the hospital, and a couple weeks later diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And she rallied at some point. She had a long hospital stay. She rallied at some point, was in a bit of remission. And I had gotten Father Josh Johnson from Sacred Heart Church. I said, Father Josh, can you just come bless her? She's not Catholic, but would you just come pray with her and bless her? And the next thing I know, he says, can you leave? Can you just give us some time alone? And they're in there for, 20 minutes, half an hour. And he opens the door and says, I can come back in. And he says, well, I'm going to come back later today, and administer the rest of the sacraments. And my mom's like, yeah, I'm going to become Catholic. And she goes, I bet you're surprised. I was like, well, yeah, like, how does this happen? And she said, well, God provided the opportunity, so I took it. And probably intuitively, she somehow, sometimes we know when God's given us a second chance. She never, because she was sick and just kind of kept getting more sick, I was never able to take her to Mass, but I would bring her communion. And I think it was God's way of, I'd been praying for her for years. I know she was so broken, and she had made some very bad decisions and actually turned to drugs a little bit herself. And I watched God work in her life in this horrible circumstance of cancer. And it helped me also to realize that God is asking me to go back to my religious community. There's just this sense of when God has something different for us and something greater in our own personal life. It's some people think that religious life is supposed to be this higher calling, and it's only a higher calling if it's the one that God's given you, and so I started to realize, it's not, though I don't belong in the world. He's asking me to go back. And actually I felt in prayer, I perceived in prayer, God saying to me, be obedient to your heart. Essentially, I'm asking you to go back to the community, to the Franciscans. And if you are obedient, I'm going to take care of everything, and I'm going to take care of your mom. And I had no idea that was going to mean. She was going to enter the church, continue to get sick. We were going to reconcile our relationship. It wasn't perfect. We always kind of butted heads and had a difficult relationship. But if I hadn't been in Baton Rouge, it wouldn't have happened, And so Father Josh
will be done, huh?
I know Father Josh said in her homily, Britt, I really think, I think God brought you back here for your mom, and if you hadn't been here, she probably wouldn't have entered the church.
And so your time is up.
It's
for us, for the real world to go back into the service world. What will that be like? We've kind of joked about you keeping up your running and how will you run in a habit or workout? Tell us about what things are going to change when you go back, good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah, well, like I said, we wear our habits for everything, whether we're working outside, mowing the grass, or taking care of the sheep, or
running on a treadmill.
Or running on a treadmill, yeah. So, I'll just have to kind of figure it out as time goes on. It's up to us. Like I will always do some sort of exercise. That's so important for my mental health and for even my spiritual health. I think it's so important. Sure. Keeping the body strong because it's easier to serve God if your body's intact. And healthy.
Running on a treadmill with a habit. That's going to be very interesting.
Could be.
But look, you look totally accepting of it, and this is the place you're going to be.
Yeah.
And, it's fabulous.
Yeah.
Well, I speak on behalf of the hundreds of people that are your friends that, Sister Regina, we're gonna miss you, and hopefully there's a way to keep in touch. And,
Absolutely.
I asked you just the other day, is there a situation where you could come back to Baton Rouge as a sister? And you said, God has plans for us. Is there any possibility?
God could open a door. It's always, I think there's, never say never. There are always possibilities. Father Josh has already asked a couple times. So we'll see. A part of religious life is poverty, chastity, and obedience. And so it's the Lord's will often works through our religious superiors. And so I can always ask, and we'll see what God does.
Well, we'd love to have you because I've, come to love you over all these years.
It's been wonderful. The Baton Rouge community is great. The Varsity sports community is great. The Sacred Heart community has been wonderful. And I'm going to miss everybody.
Yeah, you can say what you want about Baton Rouge. We've got some wonderful people in it.
That's right.
Britt, thank you so much. And I usually end this, as you know, with the running shorts, which are life lessons on the run. And I thought of one that would be, in relation to what we're talking about today. And I thought of a great one because when I used to run competitively, from time to time, my name would show up in the newspaper for having done this or that. And every time it did, I would get a handwritten, just awesome note from Bishop Stanley Joseph Ott. Every single time there would be a hand note from him. And, he was a runner himself. There's pictures of him running. And, as a matter of fact, the Bishop's Run course, the Baton Rouge gang that's listening to this, when we talk about running the Bishop's Run course over on 100 Oaks, that's dedicated to Bishop Stanley Joseph Ott. But he would write me these notes, and I told him one day, I said, Bishop Ott, I said, I'm not one of your parishioners, and I'm not even Catholic. I'm a little Methodist girl. And I can remember him. He was a slight man with a real soft voice, but oh my God, he was just a wonderful man. He said, my dear, we are all children of God, and he said he was going to give me a piece of advice that he said he borrowed from Mother Teresa, which is not, he says, I want you to know, I want you to always be a pencil in God's hand. So that was some of the best advice, and I can only hope for Bishop Ott and for the world that, that we're all including me, pencils in God's hand.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Britt, Sister Regina. Love having you.
Thank you, Jenny.
I love Louisiana.